Hey, John Morris here with howtomakemywebsite.com, and in this video we're going to create a basic form that will allow you to add data to a MySQL or MySQL database using PHP. So the first thing that I want to cover right away, just kind of to get it out of the way, is the actual form itself, because I'm sure there will be some people who kind of get hung up on this part of it, but it's actually incredibly simple. When you're using PHP with a form, the form itself doesn't necessarily actually have any PHP in it, and it doesn't have to. Majority of the time, it'll actually just be a regular old HTML form. Okay, so in case you don't know, the way that works is you start it off just like if you've been through the Web Design 101 course, and we've talked about HTML tags, and you're going to have an HTML tag called form. And then inside that form, you're just going to define some attributes. So the two that you need to have are the form action. And what that action is that's the page that this form is going, or the browser is going to send all the data that is entered in this form. It's the page that it's going to send that data to. And so what this page actually is going to be your PHP. It's going to be the page of your PHP script that's going to process that information. So that it's going to be the page that we spend most of our time on. Then there's going to be the method. So there's two methods, post and get. If you want to look that up, the difference between the two, that's fine. For the most part, you're probably going to be sticking with post. It's generally the recommended method. So 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, this is going to be post. But if you want to look that up, go ahead and go for it. And then, of course, you can see down here we have our closing form tags. And then inside there, what we have is our actual input. So you can see we have a paragraph tag, and we just type out input 1, and this is just going to be kind of the label for this input, which is going to be a text box. And then there's a number of different form elements. You can do an input, which is just a regular text box. You can do a text area. You can do a drop-down box. You can do radio buttons, and so on. So again, they're all a little bit different syntax. And we'll get into that a little bit, but you can also, again, that's something that you probably already know, or you can look up pretty easily. There's nothing special about it. So here we have an input, just a regular text box. It's a text box and not a password box. The important thing here is the name. Okay, so when we use PHP to process data, we need our inputs to have a name so that we can, when we store it in the database, we can store it under a key, and then we can reference the data that was stored, the data that was input in that text box using the key. And that'll make sense, a lot more sense as we go forward. But really the important thing here is to make sure that all your inputs have names. That way they can be stored in the database. And then, of course, we close it, and then we close our paragraph tag, and then we have another input, which is just our submit button. That's pretty much what every submit button you'll ever make looks like. Granted, you can make image ones and do some fancy stuff like that, but we're not going to really talk about that in this course. So that is a very simple yet effective form, and if we go, you can see that this is what that looks like. And so we would insert our data in here, and then we'd hit submit, and it would send that data off to this demo.php page, which is going to be our script that we write that's going to process that information. So that's the HTML form. Again, you can pretty much construct these however you want. You just will have to write your code to accommodate how you build your form here. So your how you build your HTML form is going to determine a lot with how you code this processing page, the page that processes and inputs the data. And of course, you have to structure your database according to that as well. That's all going to make sense here in just a minute. Okay, so now this is our form, and this is the data that we have, or that we're gonna take in. Now we need some place to store it. So instead of diving right into PHP, we're actually going to come to our database here, And we're going to go again into our database, and I'm just going to create a new table. So if we come back here, we can create a new table. We're going to call this demo, and the number of fields we're going to give it 2. Okay, we're going to hit go. All right, so again, we're creating we already have a database. We're just creating a table, which is like a sheet, and then we gave it 2 fields, which are like the columns going across. So we're just going to specify what those are. So again, this is where we're going to store our information. So as you can see here, we have 2 fields. The first one is just going to be one that's called an ID. You pretty much are always going to do this field, and what that is it gives the numbers for each row as it numbers down, so you can reference it that way. So you're pretty much always going to do this. It's going to be an integer. Attributes. Index is primary. It's going to be your primary key. You're going to auto increment. And that's pretty much it for that one. Now, this is pretty much always going to be like this because, again, that's your ID field. That's how you number your records. It's actually, if we come to our spreadsheet over here, we'll open this back up real quick. This ID field right here is like these numbers right here. Okay, MySQL by default doesn't have those in there, so you just create a field and you make the primary key auto increment, and that pretty much creates these numbers right here so that you can reference it. Now, this name right here is like these columns going across. So we have our ID column. Now we're going to have another column, and this is where you're going to kind of start to structure your database, and your form are going to work hand in hand. If you remember, I said that your inputs needed to have a name. That's because this name right here is going to correlate over here to this field, so that when you submit the form, then the data that's in this input box, which is this input box, is going to get stored in this field. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, the name of this, it doesn't have to be, but it's a good practice. The name of this field is the same as the form, so input 1. And if we come back to our code over here, we can see the name is input 1. Okay, so they correlate to each other. And all right, so let's go back over to our database. It's not going to be an integer. It's probably going to be, it could be a variable character, or we'll just do that. And it can be null, and yeah, we'll just leave it at that. We could put a limit on the text here, but we won't, just for these purposes. That's something when we get to security we'll talk about. Okay, so these are our 2 fields, and that would be, again, similar to having this A and this B if we were to rename that to be ID and input. Okay, so then we go ahead and save. And as you can see, it created our 2 fields. We have our ID field here, and we have our input field here with the values that we set for it. So now we have our database set up to match our form, so that when we submit data in that form, it'll have a place to be stored in the database. So now all we need to do is we need to create some PHP that will actually store that information. So what we're going to do is we're going to head over here, and we're going to go to our demo.php page. And if you remember, this is the page that the form that we created goes to. Okay, so in here we're going to enter some information. So the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to enter your access information for your database. So the name of our database was demo, And whenever you create a database, you're going to get a username and password. Depending on the host that you're using, you may have one username and password that can access all your database, which I don't recommend, because if someone gets that information, now they have access to all of your databases. Where if you have a different username and password for each database, if they get access to one, yeah, that's bad, but they don't have access to all the other ones. So that's a form of security. Most hosts that I've seen today require that you have a different username and password for each database. So anyway, you'll get that information, so you just need to enter it here. And what we're doing is we're defining constants. Okay, so constants in PHP are this tool that you can use. It's kind of like a variable, except it has a larger scope, meaning I can declare this outside here, and I could write a function, and I could use this variable inside that function without having to globalize it, which you can't do with a normal variable. So by defining these constants, if you have variables that you're going to use throughout multiple functions or throughout the majority of your script, it's a good idea to just go ahead and declare them as constants. So with your database information, that's what you're going to want to do. And of course, you can see the syntax here. It's just a define function in PHP. This is the name of the constant. This is the value. And so this is all our information here. And then from there, you're going to go in and you have to do a couple things. You can't just go right in and access information. First, you have to connect to your host. And then, and what that is the thing to keep in mind is that a web server is really just a computer. So when you visit a website, the page that's being displayed to you is a file that resides on a computer that your browser has connected to. So the first thing that you need to do before you can interact with your MySQL database, your PHP library, all the files that you're creating, they're all stored on this server. And so you have to have the file then connect to the database through PHP in order to access it. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create that link, essentially. And so this is what's called the MySQL connect. And this is a function in PHP. And what it does is you tell it what host you want to connect to. Now, again, we said that when you browse the internet, it's really all you're doing is connecting to a computer. Well, this host is that computer, okay? So since your files reside on the same server that your database resides on, then you can just use this local host, which is a default, and it'll figure out what the actual IP address for that host is for you. So you can just use local host. So you define the host, you define the user, and the password. And really, this is like logging onto a computer. If you have your computer where you have to enter credentials in order to access it, this is really just entering those credentials, your username and password to log on. So think of this as kind of like logging onto the computer, okay? So now you're logged onto the computer, but you haven't actually done anything and connected to a database yet. So the next thing you need to do is what is called this MySQL select database. You need to just select the database that you're going to work with inside of this specific connection. So, and you can create multiple connections to different databases and different tables and databases and things like this, but this is going to apply to this connection, what database you want to connect to with this connection. And so if we come back over, you'll notice that, again, I have a number of different databases. So when I connect to the computer, it's kind of like me logging on here to this home. I'm not really inside any database. I'm just connected to the computer. And then I have to select which database I want to access. So we're going to access this database. Actually, this is still forms 1. And so we're going to connect to this database using this MySQL select database. And so this is where the database name comes into play. So we're connecting to the forms 1 database. And if we come back over here, you can see that that's this database right here. Now we're connected to this database, and we can start working with the data inside the tables of this database. Okay, so these are kind of the things that you need to do right off the bat to get started. So when you're writing these, and you can see the code here, one thing that's good to do is, like I've done here, is to store your connection into a variable. And the reason that is then you can test if that connection is good. So you can see here I have it stored into a variable, and then I test to see if the link returns a true value, meaning a good link has been established. If it hasn't, then I want it to quit the script and tell me it couldn't connect and show me the error of why it couldn't connect. So if we come over here to this page, to our site here, and we get rid of this and we just browse our demo.php file directly, you see it says connected successfully. And if we come down here, you can see I've echoed that. Now, if this connection weren't good, it would kill the script right here. And so you would never see this. So the fact that I can see this on this page right here when I browse it directly tells me that not only have I connected to the host, but I've also selected a database that actually exists, and this link is good here because I did the same check with my database select. Okay, so for example, just to show you, if I were to take this password and I were to get rid of it and I were to type in oops, okay, and we save that and we go back to this page and we refresh it, now you can see I get an error. It says access denied for the user, and the reason is because this password is incorrect. Okay, that's not the password. So you have to get all this information right. If I again mess this up and I save that and I come back over, see I get a error that says that it's access denied for this user because that user doesn't actually exist. I just made it up. Okay, so you're gonna get errors if you're not connecting correctly, and this is how you can, these checks in here allow you to do that. And then you put in this at the end of all that to ensure that if all that information is correct, you get some feedback that tells you you're connected successfully. Okay, because again, that wouldn't show up, you would get an error. Okay, so now we know that we're connected to the host, we've selected the database. Now is where we can start working with data, and that's where we're going to create our SQL statements. And again, we're going to do that based off of the form with the data that gets inserted, and also our database here and the fields and the table that we need to work with. So to actually store information into our database, we're going to again create an SQL statement. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create this line of code here. What this does is, as we mentioned with the form, this form is going to pass via the post method the information submitted in this form to this demo page. Well, we have to retrieve that information, and this is how we do it. We use this line right here, which is post. Now, if you would use the get method, you would type get here instead. We use the post method, so you're going to use post, and then we're going to use, it's essentially a named array where this is you retrieve this information based off the form name, or the input name. So remember this input was named input 1, so we use this post input 1. If we had named this input 2, we would have to put input 2 here. And so for every element that you put in your form, you have to come over here and you have to create and store that value into a variable so that you can then use it to store it into the database. Okay, you don't actually have to do that. You can actually just use this directly, but I like to store it into a variable, so it's a little bit easier to work with a variable than it is with this long code right here. So it's really up to you on that one. So once you've done that, now we can go ahead and start to insert that information into the database. So we're going to create a SQL statement, and again, we want to store it into a variable so we can test it. So we're going to go with SQL equals, and then these are MySQL commands. Okay, so one of those is insert. So we want to insert. We want to insert into, and what we place here, what we want to insert it to is into the table. So we connected to the host, we connected to the database. Now we're specifying what table we want to insert this information into. Okay, so if we go back to our site, you can see that our table that we're using is demo. And so that's why in our code we specified demo. All right, so now we want to specify, we've specified the table, now we want to specify what field. Okay, and again, it's input 1. If we come back over here, we can see we have our input 1. This ID field will be automatically generated. That's why we went with this auto increment, so it'll automatically generate it, and you'll see that here in just a sec once we do some form submissions. But this is our input 1 field, so we've said we want to insert into this table, into this field, and now we're going to declare the values. Okay, so we write values so it knows that we're declaring those values, and then we use our variable from up here and declare that that's the variable that we want to put in to the database. So what's going to happen is when we submit this form, the information that gets put into that text box is going to be passed to this page. It's then going to be PHP is going to retrieve that value, store it in this variable, and then we're going to use that to place it into this statement and put it into the database. Okay, and then of course we want to test to make sure we have a valid statement. So we're going to put in this error check. We're going to put in this error check. So this is, we want to do an actual query here. So this creates the statement. Then you have to actually create the query to put it into the database. So that's what this is. And then we did an error check where we're checking to see if it actually connects and puts the information in. If it doesn't, it's going to return us this error and tell us what the error is so we can fix it. Okay, so if we save that, then we're going to, now we've got what we need in order to store this information into the database. So we head back over here and we go to our form. And we input some information, let's say okay, we hit submit. Okay, nothing happens because we haven't put any feedback in there. You can see we're on our demo page. So we got, remember the form action sends us to this demo, which is actually our script now. Okay, and we haven't put in anything to show us that it was successful. But if we head over here to our database, you can see that the information got stored into the database. And so if we come back over here and just add some more, come back. Okay, so add a little bit of data. We refresh here, you can see now it's adding these records to our database. And so you notice the ID automatically populates, and now it looks a lot like our spreadsheet. If we were to come in here and type in this information, it looks a lot like what we have over here. The only difference really being this A column, which in here we can't name, but here we can. So that's how you create a form that stores information into a database. and it's as simple as you got to connect to the host, you select the database. Once you have that done, you can grab your values from your form using whatever method you use, and then you just create a simple insert statement that inserts that information in there. And of course you do your error checks all along the way, and then you of course end it by closing the connection. So that ends this connection up there. Now you don't have to do that, because when a script in PHP ends, it automatically closes the connection, but that's a lot of times it's good to just explicitly close it. So you can see here in about 30 lines of code, we were able to connect to a database. We were able to get information from a form, and we were able to store it in that database. So now let's say we come to our form over here and we want to add some more fields. So we're going to come here, we'll copy this, and we're going to make an input 2. And input 2, we save that, and we come back over to our page here. If we submit this form, again, we're taken to this page, and we come back over here, you notice that we got the first value, but we didn't get the second one. The reason is we didn't adjust our script in our database to account for it. Okay, so what we have to do in order to have this value inserted is, the first thing is we need to come to our database, and we need to add a field to be able to store that second input into. Okay, so add one field at end of table, and we can do it after input 1, and we hit go, and we're going to call this input 2. I'm going to do variable character, we're going to do 255, and it can be null. That should be good. So we save that, and now we have our input 2. Okay, but we still got to write our PHP code. Okay, so we come back over here, and just like we did this for input 1, we need to do it for input 2. So we would write like value 2, input 2, and then here we would need to do something like this. And it's important that when the values, you put these single quotations here. If you don't put those there, it won't work. Okay, so and then not put them on the key. If you put it on the key, it won't work. So the syntax here is very specific. Okay, so when you're writing the syntax, you need to make sure you're very specific about that. Okay, so we go ahead and save this, and we come back over here to our form, refresh, submit, and we get an error. Okay, so what's the error? Well, we forgot to put in input 2 here as well. Okay, so those are all things you gotta do it for everything. All right, so come back and we hit submit. Now we should be good, and we go to demo, and now you can see that we have yep and nope. And since we didn't have this value or this field before, any record that was submitted before will just have a null. So that's basically like it being empty. Okay, and then any submission from now on will have either a value in it if they put a value in it, or it will just be blank. Okay, so for example, if we were to come over here and we were gonna go and leave this one blank, and we hit submit, and when we come down here, now you'll see that it's just blank. Okay, so that's how a very simple way to create a form that can store information in a MySQL database using PHP. And the thing about it is you always have to account for what you're going to put in your form. You have to build your database to accommodate it, then you have to write your code to accommodate it as well. Okay, so that actually is a very simple way to build forms. So if you know what form you want to build, you can go in to your database and build out the database, the tables, the fields that you want to store the information into, just like you're building a spreadsheet in Excel almost. Get that all set up. Then you can go build your form that will, that will get all that information. And then you just, from there, you write the script that connects it all together, which is this right here. Okay. And so every time you build a form, then you would just go and do that. Now, as you might imagine, doing that over and over and over again can be a little tedious. Now, you can do that, and it really is a big time saver compared to other ways of gathering information and so on. But you can do it that way. But there's also a couple different ways that you can write some code where you don't have to do that every time. And so in the next video, we're going to go into an advanced form. Now, there's, like I said, there's really two ways that you could write this. One, you could turn this code into a class. You could set up class variables for like the field names and different things like that. So all you would have to do is really change the field names, and the class would process the form accordingly based off the fields that you created and all that. And that's actually a really good way of doing it, and probably a lot of people out there would recommend that. But for me, it's just not as fun. So in the next video, I'm going to show you another way, the way I came up with for creating forms that allows you to pretty much write code once, and then all you have to do from that point forward is just write your HTML forms, and the code can adjust to it on the fly. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to do that. We're going to talk a little bit more about security in that as well, and show you some more advanced PHP. So that's in the next video, advanced form construction. So hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll talk to you in the next video.